Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Let me tell you something. While the 3 millions of people were laughing at the Stooges, were covertly imprisoned in one of the most exploitative contracts in Hollywood, that the physical humor in which you were raised observing came with a terrible human expense that studios frantically attempted to conceal, and one of them actually reached Adolf Hitler's private death list. From covert addictions toadies to the mob, from actual violence disguised as humor for financial decades-long betrayals, we're revealing more about the Untold, the tale of America's most well-known comedy 3. We're exposing 15 startling facts regarding Larry, Curly, and Moe that were purposefully hidden from fans for decades. By the time this video ends, you won't ever witness the traditional eye pokes. In the same manner, slapstick routine once more. Ted, let's start with number 15. The unexplained death of Healy. Prior to the Three Stooges rose to fame because they were supporting actors for another comedian, Ted Healy, to be exact. However, the majority of fans' eye had no idea that Healy had died in 1937 is still among Hollywood's biggest unsettling mysteries that remain unexplained. On 27th December 1937, Healy visited the Los Angeles Trocadero nightclub for what ought to have been a joyous evening. Witnesses instead claim that he received into a combative altercation with the actor Hollywood agent Pat Wallace Berry Dicko, who was known to have ties to the mob, and Albert Cubby, a future producer of James Bond Broccoli. What transpired next is dependent upon person you inquire. According to some stories, Healy was viciously assaulted in the club's parking area. Others say it was simply a quick altercation that concluded with greetings. But the following day, Healy was only 41 years old when he passed away. This is the unsettling aspect. His expression was, his body was covered in bruises and beaten. However, the official reason for kidney failure was recorded as the cause of death from drinking alcohol. The matter was resolved at a suspiciously high speed, and a lot of people think Healy was killed. However, if you believe, wait until you hear about that, because that's dark. The bizarre beginnings of their most well-known gag. Fact 14. The source of the eye poke was actual violence. You've witnessed it countless of times. Of periods. The recognizable V-shaped finger poke at the eyeballs that eventually became the hallmark maneuver of Stooges. However, what? Fans' eye had no idea that this famous gag came from an actual instance of fighting among the actors. It occurred during a light-hearted card game among the Stooges. Howard Shemp, well known for having a short fuse, came to believe Larry Fine was unfaithful. Without, he leaped from the table in warning and poked Larry in the eyes directly, not as a joke, but with real rage. Larry was hurt and in disbelief. Shemp was enraged. However, Moe, always the watcher, and a businessman, noticed something. In that moment of fury, brilliant. Recognized how well that gesture expressed annoyance in a manner that no words were required. Not long after, Moe included the eye poke as part of their procedures, changing a genuine moment of brutality into a masterpiece of comedy. But each and every remember that motion the next time you see it. Began with sincere rage and suffering amongst pals. This pattern of actual comedy out of bloodshed would haunt the Stooges for the duration of their careers. The truth. 13. Larry's early tragedy influenced his profession. The journey of Larry Fine to become a Stoog started with an almost deadly childhood mishap that was not made public from admirers for many years. Lewis was born. Larry arrived at Feinberg in Philadelphia from a household with a watch and jewelry repair business. One day, Larry was just 4 years old. He thought a drink bottle of hydrochloric acid. His dad caught on in time and swatted the bottle out of his grasp. Nevertheless, prior to the acid leaking onto Larry's forearm, piercing the flesh deeply in muscle, there was so much devastation that it left his arm shaking and feeble. In an effort to aid in their son's recovery, his parents signed him up for violin instruction. I'm hoping the bow moves and fingerwork would restore the body's strength. Injured limb. However, something surprising occurred. Larry didn't simply get back strength. he found authentic musical ability. His elegant violin playing in among the tumultuous Stooge routine produced a distinctive contrast that viewers liked, but few were aware that it originated from such unpleasant start. Speaking of unpleasant initial stages, the financial snare that would characterize their whole professional lives was established in their initial contract. The truth, 12. The agreement that took their luck. Imagine this. You're among the most well-known comedians in America, starring in blockbuster movies across the country. You're living paycheck, though, to the paycheck. The nightmare was this. The Three Stooges reality because of the most exploitative thing that could be packed in the history of Hollywood. When they in 1934, he joined with Columbia Pictures. The Stooges believed that they were protecting their future. Rather, they were strolling into a long-term financial prison 23 years. This is the startling reality. Columbia never provided them with any significant increase in more than 20 years. Stoog only made $20,000 apiece. Year. Approximately $400,000 in today's funds, but divided across several individuals for labor that was bringing in millions off of the studio. Their comedic shorts were among Columbia's most lucrative productions. However, the actors observed almost none of that success. However, this is the actual kicker. The Stooges had nothing ownership of their movies. When those vintage shorts began to air on in the 1950s, television produced enormous continuous earnings. The Stooges didn't see any money. Harry, the studio head con, employed an inhumane strategy known as open terms of choice, compelling the Stooges tour sign annually while residing in ongoing anxiety about being fired and being incapable of negotiating improved conditions. However, the financial abuse was only the start of their pain. Fact number 11. The actual wounds that lie underneath the fictitious aggression. You have witnessed the eye prods, the face slaps millions of times, and the hair tugs of periods. What you most likely were unaware of. Does Three's violence amount to that much? You were more false than Stooges' shorts. Idea. Director Jules White thought that genuine suffering made things funny responses. Therefore, he purposefully used real scissors, mallets, and other hazardous items used in the movie. Although the sound effects were overdone, the physical effect was real and frequently vicious. Mo Howard had long-term headaches during his professional life from years of violently cutting his hair yanked. Larry Fine became quite harmed to hearing from frequent slaps to his ears, and thereafter displayed indications of a tremor that medical professionals think originated after repeated head injuries. This is possibly the most unsettling instance. Larry owned a fountain pen once. Unintentionally pierced his skull in one moment. He portrayed a human board for darts. Rather than halting production, they just fixed him and carried on with the filming. Jules White was infamous for requiring several takes of hazardous situations, frequently stating one even when the Stooges were given extra time to nursing actual injuries sustained in the past attempts. However, no Stoog was paid more expensive physically than Curly Howard. The truth, 10. The tragic double existence of Curly. The curling Howard you saw on the screen, youthful, vivacious goofball, was Jerome Howard was not at all like the real one. There was a really insecure person behind the cameras, man who experienced misfortune in his life and isolation. This is something that will startle you. Jerome was curly before he was actually thought to be very attractive. Having dark, wavy hair that covers the entire head was his joy and pride. When he joined the act, he was heartbroken to discover that for the role, it was necessary to shave it completely off. The true Jerome was reserved, depressed, and favored the companionship of pets over people. Although his on-screen character exuded happiness, off-screen, he endured 4 unsuccessful marriages and recent alcohol misuse. By 1945, he'd become seriously ill. Facts were purposefully concealed from admirers. The film studio was aware of Curly's deteriorating health, but decided to maintain filming instead of giving him time to get better. What was not seen by the audience, Curly's Little Strokes were suffering during the 1940s, when Curly had the stroke that ended his career. In 1946, while filming, the studio didn't stop manufacturing. He is filmed, and Curly vanishes, halfway through the brief without any justification. From 1946 till his passing, Columbia Pictures did not provide any in 1952, backing for their prior celebrity, in spite of earning millions of dollars from his performances. However, Curly's exit brought about another catastrophe in the family. The ninth fact, the Shemp's unwelcome sacrifice. As soon as his career ended due to a stroke, Shemp Howard intervened to salvage the performance. This is what the Colombian propaganda machine never disclosed you. Shemp has no desire whatsoever to see the Stooges again. In 1946, he had made a name for himself as a respected character actor who has acted in movies with significant celebrities and obtaining both creative luxuries of control and just compensation. His brothers never had any fun. Only Shemp decided to go, back out of loyalty to family, being aware that if Mo didn't intervene, and Larry would be unable to support themselves completely. However, this sacrifice was made at enormous personal expense. Reactions from fans were vicious. Audiences are continuously argued that Shemp wasn't as humorous as Curly, establishing an impossibility for the seasoned entertainer. Regardless of how, he performed with skill, and he was always being negatively contrasted with his adored younger brother. Shemp resided in persistent worry of experiencing the same outcome as Curly. He became hypertensive, got pressure, and was preoccupied with suffering a stroke. On 22nd November 1955, following a bout of boxing, Shemp had a severe heart attack in a taxi and passed away right away. Furthermore, what occurred following Shemp's passing discloses possibly the most inconsiderate behavior of a Hollywood actor who passed away. Fact number 8, the phony Shemp scandal. Columbia Pictures is still in debt. Following that, 4 more Three Stooges short Shemp's passing, and instead of releasing them from this duty, the studio required that they finish the movies with a substitute. Director Jules White was employed. Joe Palmer will portray a phony Shemp, only capturing him on camera from behind or with things that were concealing his face. For close-ups and conversation, they merely recycled outdated Shempy clips from earlier movies. 4. Full-length shorts were made available in 1956 without recognizing that Shemp had passed away in the process of creation. Larry and Mo are appalled by this arrangement, yet felt unable to protest because of their contractual duties. This method was so infamous that it gave rise to the Shemping is an industry term for using stand-ins to finish performing for an actor who is not available. It symbolized a novel levels of exploitation in Colombia, demonstrating that even after passing away, the actors were seen to be nothing more than resources to be utilized for financial gain. However, Colombia's most, there was still betrayal to come. Fact number 7, the treachery on television. In 1957, the Stooges were cancelled by Columbia Pictures. Agreement after 24 years, basically claiming to have washed up. However, the twist is here. After only a year, Columbia started granting licenses for their previous television shorts, establishing an unanticipated cultural phenomena. The Three Stooges were suddenly more well-liked than before. Their shorts turned become the best-rated shows of their era slots, exposing them to a whole next fan generation. The harsh irony, none of this was seen to the Stooges themselves. Cash. Their 1934 agreement provided them with no residual rights, which would allow Columbia to profit from their labor indefinitely, not giving them any attention. Image this tragic scene. Howard, more reading papers with ratings that depict Stooges shorts are the most watched shows on TV. Being aware that Columbia was become wealthy as he and Larry had trouble finding employment, and this betrayal compelled the elderly actors to strike the road, continuously traveling with their placement only to get by. Whereas their previous studio was counted earnings from their labor for decades. In relation to that substitute, his narrative reveals an additional layer of hidden abuse. The 6th fact is, Curly Joe's concealed disparity. When Joe Curly Joe in 1958, Dorita joined Moe and Larry. Public relations brochures portrayed him as an equal partner. The truth was much more unjust. In contrast to the initial trio, Dorita was introduced as a newly hired worker, instead of being a full partner. Larry and Moe kept command in most earnings from what turned out to be the biggest profitable time in Stooges' history. This led to an awkward dynamic, even though he became the Stooges' spokesperson for a whole generation through Live Doritas. Performances never met the financial stability as a result of his contributions well earned. In 1970, Larry suffered a stroke, stopped the deed Dorita discovered abruptly without a source of income. Even though 12 years of being a stooge, the last disrespect during retirement. Although products with his image on them kept selling, he got very little reimbursement for these continued applications of his creations. However, if Dorita's tale appears unfair, the last chapter by Larry Finner discloses the most tragic outcome of everything. The fifth fact is that Larry is gambling addiction and a terrible demise. Larry finagled under circumstances that would surprise anyone who thought these Hollywood-style comedy legends regal. This is a heartbreaking fact that was entirely concealed. Larry possessed a severe addiction to gambling that consumed the majority of his income. As Moe Howard prudently allocated his meager income to Larry lost most of his real estate investment, earned earnings from card games and racetracks. According to his daughter, Larry would occasionally forfeit a whole week's pay in one afternoon. This implied that despite making appearances in more than 200 movies, Larry saved almost nothing at all. When Columbia terminated their agreement in 1957, Larry had a brief stint as a bartender who capitalizes on his fame status in order to receive tips. When Larry was hurt following a stroke in 1970, he spent his last 5 years in an impoverished charity facility entertainers. In spite of Columbia's ongoing earnings from the syndication of television, the studio offered no assistance with their former celebrity. In 1975, Larry passed away with almost no resources, whereas Columbia was still making millions of dollars a year from his creations. After his passing, Moe had to deal with the last tragic chapter. Fact number 4. The tragic last years of Moe Howard lived out his latter years in situations that highlight the actual cost of taking use of them. Following Larry's, in 1970, a stroke put an end to the act. Moe discovered himself in his career as adrift since the 1920s for the first time. In spite of his renown for being prudent with money, Moe was under a lot of financial strain in his last years. The man who had been featured in more than 200 films had to take strange work well into his 70s. In one especially tragic example, Moe worked at Hanna-Barbera as a gopher, studios, doing tasks at a studio lot with certain employees who aren't even identifying him without his recognizable bowler haircut. When Moe's lung condition was discovered in 1975, he had been silently battling cancer, completing a tribute as a final project to the Stooges, but the conclusion of his diagnosis, those schemes. In May, Moe passed away, only a few months after Larry's passing in 1975, bringing the original to a peaceful conclusion period. However, there were even more sinister secrets that emerged over decades. Third fact, the intentional deceit of the studio's campaign. Collier Images conducted an intentional disinformation effort to conceal the Stooges' actual worth. Inside records uncovered, decades later, demonstrate executives frequently misrepresented the box. Performance in the office, telling them shorts were barely making ends meet when they filling cinemas. In fact, the studio produced fictitious accounting records and refused to give the Stooges fans letter, preventing them from comprehending their renown. One memo from Columbia genuinely calls the Stooges our golden geese, while talking about preserving, they are happy with chicken feed. This methodical deceit exposes calculated exploitation intended to optimize earnings while lowering expenses. However, even this was not the most startling thing. Revelation. Second, the Moe relationships and risky interactions. The Three Stooges possessed a number of hazardous interactions with leaders of organized crime they were entirely concealed from the general public. In their prime years, a lot of Hollywood locations had ties to criminal families. Mo Howard's unreleased memoirs disclose horrifying events, such as taking refuge in a cellar while upstairs. Shooting broke out during a Chicago club show. Larry Finner got threats from the criminal boss, representatives following their refusal to offer of investment. The most hazardous was when Curly unintentionally saw a murder in a nightclub in Los Angeles in 1944. Studio executives right away sent him to a secure residence with private safety. Columbia put forth extra effort to prevent the media from publishing these stories, being aware of any criminal associations could ruin their reputation as a family-friendly company. However, possibly the most amazing secret puts in perspective their entire legacy. Hitler's personal death list is the first fact. This is the most amazing secret information for many years. The Three Stooges were purportedly put on Adolf Hitler's personal death list due to their audacious anti-Nazi humor. In 1940, when America remained neutral, and the majority of Hollywood refrained from disparaging foreign hate, You Nasty was released by the Stooges. Spy is a little movie that directly mocked the philosophy of Hitler and the Nazis with extraordinary audacity. Mo Howard performed Mo Hailstone, a plainly satirical of Hitler. Larry and Curly made fun of each other Nazi chieftains. The movie made fun of everything from the rhetoric of Hitler to book burnings and concentration camps. This was more than simply a joke. It was brave, political declaration that placed their professions, and possibly their lives, at danger. This was noteworthy because Larry, Curly, and Mo were all Jewish. Performers are taking huge chances to declare your opposition to fascism when it was hazardous from a political standpoint. Although major studios were quiet during the Nazi pressure, 3 Brooklyn-based comedians dared to mock evil before it became safe to do so. FBI materials made public. Several decades later, the US government considered possible risks against the Stooges are sufficiently serious to keep an eye on their security during the years of the war. Our perception of their legacy is altered by this fact.